Being a fundraiser is hard work. Not only is it time consuming, but you have to continually think of fresh and creative ways to engage your donors and supporters. If you need some fresh inspiration and ideas, check out Fundraiser Bot by Donor Perfect. Donor Perfect's Fundraiser Bot is more than just a free tool for nonprofits. It's your fundraising ally, offering you the freedom to focus on your mission while transforming your content creation process. With just a few clicks, you can generate outlines for meetings, emails, social media posts, blogs, text messages, and more. Try it for free at donorperfect.com/bot and let me know what you think. Now on to the show. Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Nation. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and I'm going to sit down with nonprofit industry experts, fundraisers, marketers, and everyone in between to get real and discuss what it takes to build that movement that you've been dreaming of. I created the Nonprofit Nation podcast to share practical wisdom and strategies to help you confidently find your voice, definitively grow your audience, and effectively build your movement. If you're a nonprofit newbie or an experienced professional who's looking to get more visibility, reach more people, and create even more impact, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Nonprofit Nation. This is Julia Campbell. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about something that I'm actually incredibly passionate about and something that I've had multiple conversations around. So the question today, what's really holding nonprofits back? Are the challenges that nonprofits face, are they merely obstacles? Or do they reveal valuable insights into our accomplishments and shortcomings? Is it something that's happening to us, or is it something that we can actually do something about? So we're going to talk a lot about myths and misconceptions around the sector. We're going to talk about the two common things that the sector is missing. We're going to talk about challenges and opportunities, and we're going to confront all of these questions sort of heads on, delving into the complexities of generosity and giving, and addressing some of the hard truths that we really need to address. And who better to be here with me than my guest, Woodrow Rosenbaum, Chief Data Officer for GivingTuesday. A lot of you have heard of GivingTuesday, a global movement dedicated to driving giving and collective action. So today we're really going to try to navigate some difficult conversations and reflections and give you some takeaways that you can use to help just do your work better and carry out your mission. So, hey, Woodrow, how are you?
I'm good, Julia. I'm excited about this. It feels like an extension of a conversation we've been having for the past year or so.
Really, and it's been a very long time coming. So I want to get right into it, but I want to ask you very quickly, how did you get into nonprofit work and what inspires you about nonprofit work?
Well, it was kind of by accident, as these things often are. My background is in commercial marketing. And so I wasn't really working in the nonprofit sector at all, not even really adjacent. Most of my work for many years was brand strategy for beverage alcohol brands. I got involved by accident with a foundation in Canada with a mission to get Canadians to be more philanthropic, looking at that as a marketing challenge. And then GivingTuesday launched in 2012, and we had been looking at potential interventions that we could try to move the needle on people's giving behavior, and thought, well, that looks really cool. We could try that in Canada. One thing led to another. And then as I started to work with the GivingTuesday community more, it became really clear that there was a big challenge in measuring the impact of GivingTuesday. And at the time, we were really just curious about how much money is being donated online on that single day. That required a lot of engagement with a lot of companies that have that data. It was my first view into how challenging the data environment is for the nonprofit sector, how siloed the data is, how incomplete. I was not accustomed to that. Working in the commercial sector, we have access to really good data about our marketplace. So we had to solve that problem, and I came on board to fix that, initially just to kind of get those key metrics. But as we started to solve that problem for Giving Tuesday, we ended up with assets and methodology and technology that really enabled us to tackle much broader questions about philanthropy and generosity in general.
We had a lot of discussions ourselves, just you and me, and in group settings around what we see as the biggest challenges kind of holding the sector back, holding nonprofit fundraisers back. And it's not what people might think. So let's start with what you see as the two biggest challenges facing the sector. And just a note, it's not AI, it's not social media, and it's not donor fatigue, which we will dive into later. But I think this will really help set the tone for our conversation.
So I think this is actually an extension of part of that data problem in the sector, because without that, we end up just making assumptions. We have self-fulfilling prophecies. We have received wisdom instead of data-driven intelligence. I think right now, as I look at it, I think there are two problems. One is a problem of accountability. There is, as you said in the lead up to this conversation, there's a kind of a viewpoint that what the results that we get in fundraising in the nonprofit sector are what happened to us, as opposed to something that we have a lot of agency over. And the second is related to that is just inclusion. The sector is less and less inclusive of all people. It's less engaging to a broad spectrum of society. It's not as relevant to as many people. And again, I don't see this so much as something that is happening to us. There are factors in our environment that are challenging, but it is ultimately incumbent on us to be more broadly engaging.
Mm-hmm. So you work for Giving Tuesday, which is a well-recognized nonprofit, but one that has a difficult mission. So I want to use you as an example here. You're changing an industry that is under-resourced, that's full of myths, that's full of bad practices, an industry that is married to the status quo, that's very risk-averse. How do you approach those two challenges, and how do you approach the challenges that you face in your work at a nonprofit?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that there's a lot we can and must do in this sector to change our practices. If we want a different outcome, we can't just continue doing the same thing. And I am frustrated by what I tend to hear, which is this isn't working, so I need to do twice as much of it. Right. We can't do that. At the same time, we are not excluded from that. We have a mission at Giving Tuesday. Our mission for radical generosity is about building communities and a global civil society and institutions that are based and built upon a spirit and a principle of generosity, broad spectrum human giving. And a component of that is this shift in practice in the nonprofit sector, particularly in the global north, particularly in the US. That's our job. So you named a bunch of obstacles. Great. That's the environment in which I work. If it was easy, they should get someone else to do it. So I hold us and myself accountable for these outcomes, not despite those challenges, but because of them.
Mm-hmm. I think what's so interesting about the accountability challenge in particular is we can't keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And we have agency, and you and I have talked a lot about agency. And the good thing with agency is that we can change, right? We can shift the practice, we can shift the results. And if you have accountability, then you're accountable for the outcome. But what I see happening is a lot of this, well, this is, like you just said, happening to me. The economy is, tanking or bad, or I don't think it is actually, but the headlines are saying that it is. There's an election. It's an election year. There's the attention economy. No one's paying attention to anything anymore. TikTok could be banned. There's AI. There's this. There's all of this kind of coming at us. And I see it as our role to really help nonprofits kind of navigate this landscape. So sort of like, how does Giving Tuesday help nonprofits navigate this landscape and give them more sort of data-backed, I was going to say data-backed data or battle-tested data, proven data that's going to help them take accountability for the work that they do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there are two points I would want to make. So first, to answer your question, we have some now fairly mature data products that provide insights into the trends in donations and fundraising and in generosity in general. That the fundraising effectiveness project that we do with the in partnership with AFP is one great example of really high fidelity trends in fundraising. Giving Pulse is another example where we have a dashboard and quarterly reports on a very, very deep look at people's giving behaviors and attitudes and values and concerns. These are useful tools, and increasingly what we're doing, and in particular this year, is focusing on making sure that those products are prescriptive and not just descriptive, so we can provide some insight into best practice. So we're running A/B tests with partners. We are sharing the results of those. We're helping our community, which is vast, to then scale up those interventions that we see are working.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think that is important to recognize is that it is a complicated environment, and we do need more tools, in part because of that, some would call fragmentation.
Mm-hmm.
The giving environment is complex and nuanced, and it always has been. I think there is a reasonable argument to say that it's more so now. But with every one of those challenges, there are opportunities. So these shouldn't be seen as only obstacles to our success. The fact that people are prolifically generous in diverse ways is a feature, not a bug.
I love that. We're going to talk about that as a myth because that was actually a myth that I bought into that you corrected me on, which I think is helpful. So there are quite a few pervasive destructive myths that seem to be infecting nonprofit fundraisers in the sector as a whole. So I want to talk about them. I have five. There's probably many more. The first that I want to talk about is donor fatigue. So I don't really want to actually spout the data about giving hitting an all-time low, all the doom and gloom around the headlines in terms of that. But you call this a self-inflicted wound. And I think that that is really intriguing. So in your opinion, and I can add my 2 cents after this, how did we come to be so obsessed with donor fatigue? And why is it wrong?
So donor fatigue is a myth. Like
Mm-hmm.
it does not exist. There is no indication that people get tired of giving. Quite the opposite. That doesn't mean that they don't get tired or disengaged from the same old message every time. And I think about this in contrast to my commercial work, and that we understand in commercial marketing that you buy frequency with quality. And if we translate this into a nonprofit arena, we have to think about our opportunities to talk to people more, but in more ways. Most people are giving in lots of different ways, and their interest is in being part of your mission, not just as the wallet. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have a lot of things to talk about. There's lots of ways that we can engage our communities in conversations and give them opportunities to be part of that mission, some of which are financial, but not all of which are only financial. And that's how we buy the frequency we need to maintain that engagement. The nonprofit sector tends to think about this in terms of, well, if I solicit somebody in exactly the same way 5 times, then every successive time I get less return on investment. So the answer is to ask less often.
Mm-hmm.
We should be thinking instead about, how do I stay relevant much more frequently?
100%. And leading into this, maybe this is like myth, 1A, communication style, because donors, yes, they are fatigued of bad communication, but they are not fatigued of good, inspiring, compelling, relevant communication. So how can we inspire nonprofits to let go of this antiquated notion that we should only be emailing once a quarter? How can we let go of this notion that we're annoying our donors?
I think part of it is structural, that too often we think about development and marketing and communications, or community engagement and comms and development, as separate things, instead of thinking about this as We have a content and storytelling model for our organization that has to have multiple outcomes for us, including fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
And so without those structures, we are just not well equipped to be that content marketing machine for our supporters in lots of different ways. But every organization has the stories. They have, and their donors have essentially subscribed to feeling good about that mission. Giving people more ways to intersect is the answer. It doesn't have to be that complicated. They can be your advocates. We see that as being a really important way that people get involved. Most organizations have some way of engaging volunteers, which is critical to retaining donors. And also just making sure that you're in dialogue with your communities so that they feel like they're contributing and they're not just recipients of a download of information in return for an upload of dollars.
Wow. I love that quote. You don't want your donors to feel like they are just a recipient of a download of information for an upload of dollars. 100%, because that goes back to the transactional versus like relational type of fundraising. So the second myth, these are myths that I hear every day, all day, and I know that you hear them as well. Funders only want to fund immediate needs. If you don't have sort of a sexy, urgent cause like saving animals or feeding the hungry or housing families or curing cancer, you can't get support. What would you say to that?
I mean, it's not to say that, look, there are some shortcuts, right? Like, we definitely see social media posts with pictures of babies do really well. In fact, what we saw was if you have a picture of a baby on your social media post, it does really well, regardless of what your cause area is. It doesn't have to have anything to do with babies. We do respond to some of these things,
Just
and
biology, I
it
think.
is 100%. And it's so yeah. And if your organization happens to work directly at a cause area that is related to immediate critical needs, obviously you have a shortcut to a short term engagement with people. Okay, so what, right? Like, within the context of our organization and our mission, we have to find the people that care about us, and any organization can find that community that is aligned with their mission. And the key thing that is to find lots of on ramps and then make sure that you stay very engaged with them. One of the biggest challenges in the nonprofit sector fundraising environment right now is just a continued decline in retention.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we also need to step up our acquisition. But if you're an organization that isn't, you know, puppy forest fire protection for babies, I get it. Like, you don't have that urgency. But what's interesting is observing Giving Tuesday as an intervention, because we know that urgency is the number one driver of donation intent. But what Giving Tuesday shows is that you don't need an emergency to have that urgency. So finding ways of giving people a reason to act now is really important in that first acquisition step.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you've identified somebody who actually cares about your weirdo little cause that doesn't have babies. That's fine, because now you've identified them. Then what is really critical, and where I think we're losing the most ground, is in that continued engagement. Maintaining that retention is that much more important if you're not on the front pages, but it's also something that's within your control. And then that's where the fact that you're a weirdo cause is actually to your benefit,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you have to build community in dialogue with your supporters, and it cannot just be about constantly transactional, or you'll be chasing those weirdos all the time. You have to manage that churn that much more carefully.
What I say to people that ask me this question, I say, well, what is your job? Your job's to raise money for this cause, right? Your job is to inspire curiosity, inspire inspiration, inspire engagement, get people that, you don't really want to convince complete strangers to care necessarily, although that's a piece of it. But how are you getting these people on the bus and keeping them on the bus? The people that do care, the people that are inspired, and the people that do really care deeply about things like systems change and long-term solutions. So it goes back to that accountability piece. It's like, well, I don't have a magic silver bullet for you to get people to care, but the people that do care, once they care and you're giving them that right message and sharing those stories with them. And not to like name drop, but when I had Seth Godin on my podcast, when I talked to him, I asked him a similar question. And he really said the same thing. He said it's not a numbers game when it's about systems change. It's about a passion. It's about passion. It's about people that are willing to spread the word and that really care deeply. And he gave the example of Acumen, an organization that he supports. And their mission is really alleviating poverty and like dismantling systems that contribute to poverty. And that is not a sexy social media post, right? That is a long-term message that people have to buy into. So
Yeah,
when
I
you get
think
that buy-in, yeah, did you want to add to that?
well, yeah, I mean, every organization and every brand has its challenges. That's just a
Yes.
fact. And I saw this in my commercial work as well, right? Is that brands with like niche brands always felt like they were at a disadvantage. But I think this is partly about a misunderstanding of how marketplaces operate.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about, if the if you think about what our available market is, you don't need 90% of people to donate to you to have a really successful organization.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has that, even the biggest brands. What niche brands have, and I think this is true of niche causes as well, is that you can really connect in a way that is very unique with the supporters that you do identify. And that is a very powerful thing, particularly for the resilience of your organization long term. Brands don't need to appeal to everybody. The vast majority of brands and causes don't and won't. So, yes, it may mean different strategies and tactics to ensure that you identify and are in front of the right people,
Mm-hmm.
but then you don't need everybody. So, it's not that important that you're that broad. It's not nearly as important to be broadly appealing as people think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Okay, third myth, because we got to get through these myths. This is a good one. Giving Tuesday and giving days cannibalize, and I'm putting that in quotes, annual giving and distract donors from giving at year end. And I know the data has proved this is wrong. So tell me about this myth.
Yeah, I mean this is this classic, and I do think it's starting to wane. This sort of
Okay.
classic scarcity mentality, but it does still exist in a lot of ways. So less so, I think, with respect to like Giving Tuesday or Giving Days. That is, but I think that scarcity concerns still really underpin a lot of counterproductive practices in fundraising. But it was one of the very first things we looked at when we started building data around Giving Tuesday. We knew from the platform partners, the donation platforms we were working with, that they were saying no, we're not seeing any cannibalization, but we wanted to be able to validate what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at giving over multiple years at a transaction level. And sure enough, we saw what we expected, a spike in giving without a corresponding drop.
Mm-hmm.
And that spike in giving grows each year. We're seeing some very interesting nuance within that. But the bottom line being that there's a lot more elasticity in the donor environment and in the American donor than we think there's going to be, which means, incidentally, that we're leaving money on the table every day of the year.
We're leaving money on the table constantly when we're not asking and we're not giving people that compelling reason to give and to participate. I
People are
agree
generous.
completely. People
People are
are
generous,
incredibly
and we
generous.
see them they give in lots and lots of ways. Where it's clear from Giving Pulse that one of the most important things there is just getting asked and engaged, because when we look at the people who are not giving as much to nonprofits, we find they're much less likely to get asked by nonprofits to give. And that means,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, that's an equity problem. It means that the people who we are engaging have more say in how the nonprofit sector solves problems. And that is increasingly meaning fewer and fewer rich people.
Mm-hmm.
And at the expense of providing agency and voice to a broader community. The other thing that does is it makes us a lot less resilient, because
Mm-hmm.
organizations with a broad base of support and lots of grassroots givers are more resilient over the medium to long term. We need that for the health of the sector. We need to be more relevant to more people. But this scarcity environment mentality of if someone gives now, they'll have less to give later, or if someone gives to this, they'll have less to give to that. The market does not operate like that. There is no evidence that it does. The theoretical ceiling on donation is so far away from us that is not a problem that we can foresee happening anytime soon. There's the best indicator someone's going to take some action for good is that they did some other action for good.
It's that. And this is actually something that we talked about in our last call, and I wanted to put it as a myth. So this is like myth number 4, the crowding out theory. So I had been reading a lot of headlines about competition from other forms of giving and giving mechanisms, like rounding up at the checkout counter, giving to GoFundMe campaigns, giving to people instead of institutions, peer-to-peer campaigns. But you proved me wrong, and you said the crowding out theory actually it doesn't represent reality. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, we don't see, there's no evidence at all that there's a crowding out. If
So
anything,
amazing. I love it. I love to be proven wrong.
if anything, what we see is crowding in. We see that compared to their peers, people who give directly to people in need through things like GoFundMe campaigns are more likely to give to nonprofits, are more likely to say they trust nonprofits. They're more likely to say they enjoy giving. This is the customer. People are giving, and giving is generative. And because we have not tapped out the American giver, we see it on every Giving Tuesday. We see it at every natural disaster. We see this crowding in without the cannibalization you described. And we see it where we look at any of these generosity behaviors, whether it's giving to nonprofits, giving to individuals, or giving to mutual aid organizations, these very, or sometimes very structured environments that are just not incorporated. The best indicator that somebody's going to do some other thing is that they've done one of those things. It's true of money and time and volunteering and advocacy.
Oh yeah, ask a busy person if you want something done.
Giving is not competitive. We are not in competition with each other nearly as much as people think we are. We're not in competition for a donation now versus a donation then. We're just not. And it's interesting to look at Giving Tuesday again as an intervention and a best practice. Giving Tuesday is the single biggest day for donor acquisition all year. Also, those donors have a higher lifetime value and retain better than donors acquired at other times of the year. And that's about how they're being engaged, not some magic thing that Giving Tuesday did to those donors. It's an indication of what's possible when we do take a different approach to our fundraising, because Giving Tuesday, from a fundraising strategy and tactics perspective, does look different than most of the rest of the year. And the outcome is what we want to see changed. So we're digging deeper into this, but we've got a pretty good prescription for it. We have to abandon this idea of scarcity and competition, though, or we're not going to be open to the opportunity.
I love that. I don't think I would add anything to that. That's fantastic. I agree with you. People or nonprofits are more likely to experiment with different messaging. They're more likely to send more communication. They're more likely to be more active on social media and on digital channels on Giving Tuesday. And that should prove to us that this resonates with donors because it works. So this mindset where, oh, we can't ask on Giving Tuesday because then we can't ask at year end is a complete fallacy, and the data proves it. So we will put a link to the show notes to all of the different resources that you cited. So Woodrow, I'm thinking about trust. This is the 5th myth, I think. And now maybe I'm getting into the self-fulfilling prophecy territory. So we've read the surveys, we've read the reports, another doom and gloom headline. Trust in institutions and in philanthropy is plummeting across the board, and there's nothing that nonprofits can do about it. What would you say to that myth?
So I think it's worth acknowledging that trusted institution is waning, and that we're seeing that there are some negative trends in trust of nonprofits. However, I think what's misunderstood is the nature of trust. First of all, people don't give to you because they trust you. They might not give to you if they don't trust you. Like, trust is table stakes, but it doesn't actually inspire anybody to take any action. Secondly, I think what is often misunderstood, and partly because we ask the wrong question, is the how we gain trust. And I think by and large we gain trust by being relevant and engaging in people's lives. The things we need to do to build trust are actually the same things we need to do to just be emotionally inspiring for most givers. So just again, being in dialogue, not being transactional, talking about the mission, like these are the things that are going to get the job done. It's not about, I promise not to waste your money. And I think part of the problem there is that too often that's the way we've asked about trust. We say, how important is it that the nonprofit not waste your money? Well, it's very important. And then nonprofits think, well, that's what I have to talk about. I have to talk about how I'm not going to waste the money. Instead, right? I have to talk about how trustworthy I am. But the way we build trust is by being relevant to somebody, not by telling someone to trust me. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of like, don't tell me you're funny, make me laugh.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, actions speak louder than words always. And trust is table stakes. Not wasting the money is table stakes.
Right, exactly.
At this point.
Yes, messaging about
corrupt.
that is right. Yes, exactly. We're not corrupt. It's just not a very compelling reason to give to somebody.
No. And we've been in the organization, we've been in the community for 60 years. Great. Wow. Like that's not a reason that I'm going to give to you. Like that's wonderful, but that's just the base of your message. I mean, that's just underlying that.
If you have, I mean, yeah, I think, and I've seen this again, some very similar challenges in some of my commercial work, mm-hmm. but it boils down to, if I think it's helpful to think about trustworthiness as an mm-hmm. example, as how you ensure that you give someone permission to take the action that they want to take. Mm-hmm. So it's not what inspires the action. That's going to be some kind of emotional relevant connection and sense of urgency, a reason to act now, which nonprofits are not very good at, unless it's an emergency, right? Where the urgency lever that we tend to have to pull is just it's an emergency. Literally something is on fire. What we need to do is find other ways where we can inspire people, the reason why you should act now that doesn't necessarily require a disaster. Mm-hmm. What we want to do then is to ensure that we have enough indication that we're trustworthy to give people permission to take that emotional action that they want to take. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's different than leading with a message about why we're not going to waste your money.
Absolutely. All of these things I really don't think communicators and marketers have thought about, also because a lot of people that are doing marketing in the sector do not come from marketing backgrounds. They come from social work backgrounds, programmatic backgrounds. And it's just interesting. Like I feel like when I talk to nonprofit marketing departments or fundraising departments, they feel like they represent their donor. And that if they don't like something, their donor's not going to like it. Or if they don't like this in their direct mail or their marketing campaign that's coming at them, their donor is not going to respond. And I think we need to be more strategic and more, we need to reflect more on what we're putting out there and the messages that are actually working. And we can use data to analyze all of this and improve it. So this is really interesting.
Which means trying more things, yeah. And to give people a little bit of credit. I've seen major brands make similar mistakes about what to message because they weren't asking the right questions about their marketplace, and they ended up talking about something that ultimately wasn't a driver of the purchase or a differentiating factor for their brand. Like it is a challenging thing, but that's where, yes, trying more message and experimenting mm-hmm. with what works is really important, and recognizing that that personal emotional connection is what's going to get the job done.
That's very important. This is not a challenge unique to the nonprofit sector by any stretch of the imagination. We've seen some marketing campaigns that have gone wildly out to left field and been completely ineffective. So I think that just the strategy of not thinking about it as something that's happening to us, thinking about it as an opportunity, thinking about it as something we can change and iterate and analyze, measure results and improve. So almost looking at it like a scientist, like experimenting with different things and seeing what works. So let's talk about, we could talk about AI. We can talk about a million things. I want to talk about the report that will be out by the time this episode is released. The look back report. Can you tell us about that? What insights can we hope to glean from it, and where we can get it?
Yeah, what we've tried to do with this report is move the needle um, back, or continue to move the needle toward more prescription, more not just describing what happened last year, but really instead looking at being able to say to nonprofits, this is what we think you can do about this. The fact that we're out in the field testing stuff is really going to be helpful this year.
Mm-hmm.
When we look back at last year, we've got more nuance now in the data about the community of givers in the US in particular, although we are looking more globally every year as well. One thing that is really, really clear is that despite potential challenges and suppressing factors in our environment, most people are giving, and they're doing so in lots and lots of ways. So we look at, as I described, we look at this kind of spectrum of giving from the what some would call formal to registered nonprofit organizations on one end, and giving directly to individuals in need on the other. And in the middle, there's a lot of interesting behaviors and structures, many of which predate the nonprofit sector by millennia. Mutual aid organizations and that type of collective community giving is probably the oldest way that we've come together to support our communities. And it happens in lots of places and in lots of different ways. And we are getting a really interesting view of what that landscape looks like. Mm-hmm. And what we see is that, again, it's not an either or. People doing more of one or the other of those things is not competitive. In fact, these things tend to move together. Mm-hmm. Giving really does seem to be generative. What we hope this means for nonprofits and thinking about how they engage is to recognize that when you're asking someone to give, contrary to a lot of the narrative we're hearing, you should be approaching somebody as already a generous person making change in their community. Mm-hmm. So if you think about what your message is, right? If your message is not about, I want to change somebody from not a giver to being a giver, that's going to be very different from, I'm here to talk to you about the change that you are already making and how I can be part of making that change with you. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a lot more compelling. It's going to be a lot more engaging to that individual, and it's much more accurate. Most giving doesn't involve a nonprofit. That doesn't mean people aren't generous. Mm-hmm. So that's really key. Then the other factor is just, again, as I said, solicitation. Like, we need to be out there more. We need to be talking more, a lot more. We see that there's big opportunity for deseasonalizing giving, probably spring, summer being where the sweet spot is. We see a little bit of uptick there that we're digging into more deeply. Mm-hmm. We think this points to a big opportunity for the nonprofit sector to drive a lot more donation by being more active around that time. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is to think about is the fact that just like the mechanisms people use are very diverse, what people give is also diverse. People give money and they give time and they give things. They give things more than they give money. Mm-hmm. And they're advocates. And when we look at that spectrum across the continuum of kind of formality of mechanism, we get some really interesting factors, but including the fact that most people are going to do more than one of these things, and many people do all of them. So again, what does that tell you about how to engage? Well, first, if you're only about money, then you're leaving engagement on the table. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Second, yes, people are prolific, and there's a lot of diversity in that, particularly the younger people are. We should be thinking about that as an opportunity. We're not in competition for the other things that they're doing. We are there to supplement, give them in other ways. But it also means there's this. It means that that's the answer to what do I talk about more often. right? Well, you talk about all the other ways people can get involved, and you ask them questions and get their dialogue and ask them to be advocates. That it means that you're not. And I used to worry about this. I used to worry that, well, you got to ask for what you want. And so that's got to be money. So you should be money first. And the data really don't support that strategy, which on its face seems natural. But really what we should be thinking about is that I want to engage with my supporter as much as possible. And that means I need to be about different things, or that's when the quote donor fatigue will kick in. And that's the way you keep people engaged and keep them donating and increase the lifetime value and convert them to recurring givers, by making them a subscriber to your cause.
Yep. There's so much to talk about. I love it. I'm going to have you back on, obviously, Woodrow. But I want to ask you, where can people join the Giving Tuesday movement, learn more about you, connect with you online?
So all of our data work you can find at givingtuesday.org/data. So that's the best way to find our latest reports and the projects that we're working on. And then, of course, for resources to get involved in the movement, to start a community campaign, to get stuff for your organization to activate on the day and all year, givingtuesday.org has everything you could ever want.
Thank you. And thanks so much for everything you're doing for the sector, for the generosity movement, and just to, get more people giving and get nonprofits to really understand the opportunities around generosity and giving. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Well, hey there. I wanted to say thank you for tuning into my show and for listening all the way to the end. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, and you'll get new episodes downloaded as soon as they come out. I would love if you left me a rating or a review, because this tells other people that my podcast is worth listening to. And then me and my guests can reach even more earbuds and create even more impact. So that's pretty much it. I'll be back soon with a brand new episode. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at JuliaCampbell77. Keep changing the world, you nonprofit unicorn.